Artillery fire tore through the defensive line like the hand of God ripping open the earth. The first shell landed 30 meters short of Alpha Platoon's forward position, sending a geyser of frozen Montana soil skyward. The second found its mark. Sandbags exploded. Timber support splintered into javelins. 3 soldiers disappeared behind a curtain of dirt and smoke and screaming. Sergeant Rowan Hastings pressed his back against what remained of the communication station and tried to think. Tried to breathe. Tried to do the one thing a platoon leader was supposed to do when everything fell apart. Lead. But the math was killing him. 23 soldiers that morning. 12 still combat effective. Radio dead. No air support. No artillery of their own. And an enemy force that outnumbered them 3-1, advancing with the disciplined patience of professionals who knew they had already won. Blood ran from a cut above his left eyebrow, pooling in the socket, turning half the world red. He wiped it away with the back of his hand and immediately regretted it. His hand was shaking. 14 years in the Army and his hand was shaking. "Vance," he called out. "Status on comms." Corporal Jesse Vance ducked as a burst of rifle fire sparked off the metal equipment rack beside him. Brass casings and fragments peppered the air. He pressed himself flatter against the frozen ground before shouting back. "Everything's fried, Sarge. Main set took a direct hit. Backup's got no power. We're cut off." Hastings cursed under his breath. Cut off. 2 words that meant everything in combat. Cut off meant no reinforcements. No medevac for the wounded. No one coming to save them. He risked a glance over the ridge. What he saw made his stomach drop. Enemy infantry were advancing in coordinated fire teams across the open ground below Ember Ridge. Proper bounding overwatch. Alternating squads leapfrogging forward while their companions provided covering fire. Textbook movement. Professional spacing. These were not militia. These were not irregulars scraped together from some forgotten province. These were soldiers. Trained, equipped, and hunting. Intelligence had failed them. Spectacularly. Catastrophically. What was supposed to be a lightly defended observation post in the Montana high country had turned into a coordinated assault by a battle-hardened unit. Someone at headquarters had read the satellite imagery wrong, or ignored the signal's intercepts, or simply rolled the dice with Alpha Platoon's lives. Now the bill was coming due. "They're flanking left," Private Emmett Caldwell yelled from his position near the eastern barrier. He was 20 years old. Farm kid from Iowa, 2 months in country. His voice cracked on the word left, and Hastings could hear the fear in it, raw and honest and absolutely justified. Another mortar round impacted. Closer this time. The concussion wave hit Hastings' chest like an open palm shoving the air from his lungs. Somewhere behind him a soldier screamed. Not a battle cry, not anger. Pain. The high, thin sound of a man discovering what it meant when the body broke. Hastings' mind raced through options like a man flipping through a Rolodex of bad choices. Direct engagement. Suicide. They were outgunned and outmanned. A straight firefight would last 10 minutes before they were overrun. Retreat. Death. The enemy had positioned forces along every viable withdrawal route. Running men exposing their backs to coordinated fire. They'd be cut down before they covered 50 meters. Hold and wait. For what? No one was coming. No one even knew they were in trouble. There was one option left. One card he hadn't played because he didn't have it in his hand. Precision fire. A marksman who could reach out and touch the enemy at distance. Someone who could disrupt their command structure, eliminate their heavy weapons. Crews create enough chaos in those disciplined formations to buy time. Buy anything. "Any snipers here?" The words exploded from his throat before he could measure them. Raw. Desperate. The kind of shout a drowning man makes when he's going under for the 3rd time and doesn't care anymore about dignity or protocol or the calm, steady voice they taught him to use at Fort Benning. "Any snipers here?" Silence answered him. Not true silence. The continuous roar of combat filled every frequency of sound. Rifles cracking, mortar tubes thumping, the distant thud of heavy weapons chewing through the landscape. But no human voice responded to his call. He looked at the soldiers around him. Riflemen, machine gunners, a couple of grenadiers, standard infantry, every one of them. Good soldiers, brave soldiers. But not one of them carried the training or the weapon system needed to reach out past 800 meters and change the equation. Hastings felt the crushing weight of command. The weight that came when you understood truly, understood that the people depending on you were going to die because you couldn't find a way to save them. In less than 10 minutes, the enemy would be close enough to throw grenades into their position. His soldiers would die, because he couldn't think of anything else to do. "Sergeant!" The voice was so quiet he almost missed it, a whisper beneath the thunder. A single word barely louder than the wind cutting across the ridgeline. Hastings turned. In the corner of the trench, partially hidden behind a stack of ammunition crates, stood a woman. Small. Slight. Dark hair pulled back tight beneath her helmet. She wore the same uniform as everyone else, but on her, it looked borrowed like a child wearing her father's coat. Private Elena Graves. She'd been transferred to Alpha from logistics support 4 days ago. Quiet. Kept to herself. Did her work without complaint, without conversation, without the casual banter that soldiers use to build bonds and pass the hours. Hastings had barely spoken 10 words to her since she'd arrived. He'd assumed she was just another administrative body pushed forward to fill a slot on the roster. The kind of transfer that happened when headquarters needed the numbers to look right on paper. She was looking at him now with an expression he couldn't read. Not fear, not eagerness, something else entirely. Something that lived behind her eyes like a light in a window at the end of a very long road. "Graves," Hastings said. Confusion cut through his urgency. "Get down before..." But she wasn't getting down. She was reaching for her pack. The oversized one that had seemed oddly heavy when she'd arrived. The one she'd carried everywhere, even to the latrine, even to chow, never letting it out of her sight. Some of the soldiers had joked about it. What she got in there her entire life. Nobody was joking now. Her movements were deliberate. Methodical. The slow, certain precision of someone performing a task they had performed 1,000 times before. She pulled the pack in front of her and began unlacing it with steady fingers. Not fumbling, not hurrying, working with the kind of calm that had no business existing in the middle of a firefight. The kind of calm that came from a place deeper than training, deeper than discipline, from some core of self that the chaos of the world could not reach. The soldiers nearest to her stopped what they were doing. In the middle of a firefight with bullets cracking overhead and mortar rounds shaking the earth beneath their boots, they stopped and watched. Because something about the way this woman moved demanded attention. Elena's hands worked with practiced efficiency. She peeled back layers of carefully arranged gear. Not the random jumble of a typical soldier's pack. Not the disorganized heap of socks and rations and personal items that most infantry carried. This was organized with almost surgical precision. Every item nested perfectly, every layer serving a purpose. And there, cushioned in custom-cut foam padding, was a rifle case. She drew it out. Black polymer, reinforced hinges, military-grade combination locks. The case alone was worth more than everything else in the trench combined. "Graves, what the hell?" Hastings started. She opened the case. Even in the chaos of combat, several soldiers audibly gasped. The sound cut through the gunfire like a knife through paper. Sharp, involuntary. The kind of sound men make when they see something that doesn't belong in their world. Nestled inside that case, cradled in foam like a sleeping child, was an M17 Barrett .50 caliber anti-materiel rifle. But this was not a standard issue weapon, not even close. The barrel had been customized with a specialized muzzle brake designed to redirect blast pressure laterally. The scope was a Schmidt & Bender 5 to 25 times 56, with ballistic turrets that looked hand-calibrated, each click mark, etched with the kind of precision that came from a master armorer working in a classified facility. The stock bore the subtle wear patterns of a tool that had seen years of field service. Thousands of rounds, hundreds of deployments, a weapon that had lived a life as full and violent as the person who carried it. The entire rifle showed signs of meticulous maintenance, not the kind you learned in basic training, not the kind you learned in logistics support school. This was the obsessive, almost religious care of someone whose life depended on every component functioning perfectly at the moment of truth. "Where did you get that?" Vance breathed. Elena didn't answer. She was already performing a functions check. Her movements were fluid, automatic. The muscle memory of 10,000 repetitions flowing through her hands without conscious thought. Chamber clear. Bolt cycling smooth. Scope mounts tight. Trigger mechanism clean. She reached back into her pack and withdrew 2 magazines. Even from 5 feet away, Hastings could see the rounds loaded inside. Raufoss MK211. Armor-piercing high-explosive incendiary ammunition. Each round designed to punch through light armor, detonate on impact, and ignite whatever was on the other side. 10 rounds per magazine. 20 rounds total. She loaded the first and stowed the second in her chest rig with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. That ammunition was not available through standard supply channels. It was restricted, controlled. The kind of ordinance that required signed authorizations from people whose names didn't appear on organizational charts. Hastings' mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Logistics personnel did not carry Barrett rifles. They did not have access to specialized ammunition. They certainly did not handle a $50,000 weapon system like they'd been born with it in their hands. Graves, he said slowly. The combat around them seemed to fade just for a moment, as if the universe itself was leaning in to hear what came next. Who are you? She looked up at him. For just a moment, he saw something flash in her eyes. Grief, maybe. Or regret. The kind of old, heavy sorrow that accumulates over years, compacting under its own weight like geological strata. Layers of loss pressed into stone. Then it was gone, replaced by something else. Something cold and precise and utterly focused. Someone who can help, she said. If you let me. Another mortar round impacted 30 meters away. The blast wave threw dirt and shrapnel across their position. A soldier screamed. Kyle Weber, the young private from their 3rd squad, was clutching his side where a fragment had torn through his body armor. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and steady. The enemy was advancing, closing the distance. Every second of hesitation was a second they couldn't afford. Hastings made his decision. Not because he understood what was happening, not because he trusted this woman he'd barely spoken to, but because he had no other choice, and a man with no choices isn't really making a decision at all. He's just recognizing reality. Do it, he said. Elena nodded once. A single dip of her chin. No wasted movement. No expression of relief or gratitude or anything else that might suggest this moment was significant to her. She simply accepted the authorization and went to work. She settled the Barrett across the sandbags, adjusting the bipod with minute precision. Tiny movements of her fingers. Millimeter corrections that meant the difference between a hit and a miss at extreme range. Her entire demeanor had changed. The quiet, unassuming logistics clerk who'd spent 4 days blending into the background was gone. In her place was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. The transformation was immediate and complete, like watching a key turn in a lock. Everything about her shifted. Her posture, her breathing, the set of her jaw. Even the way she held her head changed, tilting slightly to accommodate the scope's eye relief. She became the rifle, and the rifle became her. And together, they were something that the enemy advancing across that frozen Montana hillside had not planned for. She moved to a reinforced section of the defensive wall, selecting her firing position with an expert's eye. She needed clear sight lines to the enemy's approach routes. She needed structural support strong enough to absorb the Barrett's brutal recoil. And she needed at least 2 escape routes in case her position was compromised. The spot she chose between 2 concrete barriers near the eastern edge of their perimeter met all 3 criteria. Several soldiers watched her with open confusion. Emmett Caldwell, the young rifleman from Iowa, leaned toward his squadmate. The words came out in a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. Since when does logistics know how to handle a Barrett? That thing's not standard issue either. That scope alone cost more than my truck back home, Nora Priestley whispered back from her position. Look at the way she moves. That's not someone who learned this in a classroom. That's muscle memory. That's thousands of hours. Hastings moved closer to Elena, positioning himself where he could observe both her and the approaching enemy. Up close, he noticed details he'd missed before. Details that changed everything. The rifle case bore scuff marks that suggested years of field use in varied terrain. Sand abrasion on one corner, impact dents on another. Scratches from being hauled through tight spaces, dense vegetation, urban rubble. This case had traveled the world. And Elena's hands. They moved with the unconscious precision of someone who had done this so many times that the act of setting up a sniper rifle was no more remarkable than tying a shoe. She extended the bipod legs, adjusted the cant, settled behind the scope with the comfortable intimacy of someone returning to a place they'd been trying to forget. Her breathing changed immediately. Deep, controlled respirations. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. The rhythm of a trained marksman preparing to fire. Each breath cycle designed to minimize the body's natural movement to create windows of absolute stillness between heartbeats. Graves, Hastings said quietly. He knelt beside her, close enough to speak without shouting. I need to know what I'm working with here. What's your real background? Her eye remained pressed to the scope. Through the optics, she was tracking movement downrange, reading the battlefield, cataloging targets with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years turning chaos into order through the simple, terrible mathematics of a rifle scope. Does it matter right now, Sergeant? It matters if I'm about to trust my soldiers' lives to someone I don't know. For a moment, she went still. Not the stillness of hesitation, the stillness of someone deciding how much truth to release into the world, how much of themselves to reveal. Then, without moving from her firing position, she spoke. Her voice was steady, clinical. The voice of someone delivering a field report, not a confession. 3 years ago, I was part of an operator training program, Specialized Marksmanship Division, Shadow Line Unit. Hastings felt his blood run cold. Shadow Line. He'd heard the name exactly twice. Once in a classified briefing at Fort Bragg, where a colonel with no name tag had mentioned a program that operated in denied areas. Places where American military forces were not officially present, where missions were not officially sanctioned, where soldiers carried no identification, wore no insignia, and did not exist on any roster or payroll or organizational chart. The second time was in a bar outside Camp Lejeune, where a retired Special Forces operator had gotten drunk enough to whisper about snipers who could hit targets at distances that defied physics. Operators who carried out elimination missions that officially never happened. Ghosts with rifles who changed the course of engagements of campaigns of entire conflicts one bullet at a time. And then they vanished. Back into the fog. Back into whatever shadow they'd come from. You're saying you're a shadow line operator? Former? Elena corrected. She made a minute adjustment to her elevation turret. 1 click, maybe 2. The kind of correction that mattered only at extreme distance, where the difference between a kill and a miss could be measured in fractions of an inch. I left the program. They don't usually let people leave, but circumstances allowed it. What circumstances? The kind that make you want to stop killing people. Before Hastings could press further, Elena's entire body tensed. Through her scope, she'd found something. Her breathing slowed even further. Her finger moved from its resting place along the trigger guard to a position just above the trigger itself. Not touching, not yet, but ready. Enemy sniper, she said. 11 o'clock, 830 meters. In the tree line behind that burnt-out vehicle. He's using the engine block as a rest. Hastings raised his binoculars. He scanned the area she'd described. Trees, smoke, the hulk of a destroyed truck. He could barely make out the vehicle at that distance, let alone identify a concealed shooter hidden in the timber behind it. You're sure? Scope glint. 3 seconds ago. Brief flash upper left quadrant of the vehicle's cab. He's tracking your position, Sergeant. Setting up to eliminate leadership first. Standard doctrine. Take out command and the unit falls apart. Hastings' jaw tightened. She was right about the doctrine. Decapitation strikes against command elements were textbook. If he went down, Alpha Platoon would lose whatever cohesion it had left. The soldiers would fight on individually, because that's what soldiers did. But without coordinated leadership, the enemy's superior numbers would overwhelm them in minutes, instead of the 10 they might have otherwise. Can you take him? Elena was already running calculations. Not on paper, not on a ballistic computer. In her head, where years of training had burned the mathematics so deep that the equations solved themselves like breathing. Wind speed. She watched the movement of bare branches in the distant tree line, the way smoke from a burning vehicle drifted and curled, approximately 12 miles per hour left to right. Consistent, not gusting. Good. Temperature. Roughly 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Late autumn in the Montana highlands. Cold air meant denser atmosphere. The bullet would encounter more resistance. She adjusted. Target distance, 830 meters. Confirmed by the reticle markings in her scope. Cross-referenced against the known dimensions of the vehicle the enemy sniper was using as cover. Elevation angle, -4 degrees. She was shooting slightly downhill, which meant the bullet would impact higher than a level shot at the same distance. She compensated. Her finger rested along the trigger guard. Not yet committed. Not yet crossed the line between preparation and action. Range is optimal, she said. But there's a problem. What problem? If I take this shot, I announce our capabilities. Every enemy soldier within visual range will know we have a long-range precision asset. They'll adjust tactics. They'll use better cover. They'll move faster, use smoke call in their own counter-sniper elements. She paused. The weight of what she was about to say hung in the air between them. And I'll have to keep shooting. Once I start, I can't stop until this is over. Hastings understood what she wasn't saying. Once Elena revealed herself, she would become the single highest priority target on the battlefield. The enemy would pour fire onto her position. They would redirect resources specifically to find her, pin her down, and kill her. Every shot she took would narrow her options, reduce her cover, and increase the probability that the next bullet coming her way would be the one she couldn't dodge. Once she pulled that trigger, she was committed. All the way. To the end. Another explosion rocked their position. Weber screamed again. The medic was working on him, hands slippery with blood, but Hastings could see the pallor spreading across the young man's face. Too much blood. Too fast. He looked back at Elena. At this woman who had hidden herself in plain sight for 4 days. At the weapon that should not exist in a logistics clerk's possession. At the cold professional calculation in her eyes that spoke of a life lived in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Graves," he said, "I'm giving you full authorization to engage. Autonomy on target selection. Do whatever you need to do." She nodded once. Her breathing deepened. Slowed. 4 seconds inhale. 4 seconds exhale. Her heart rate was dropping. Hastings could see it in the pulse point at her neck. The steady throb decelerating like an engine being deliberately throttled back. 60 beats per minute. 55. 50. Professional snipers trained themselves to fire between heartbeats in the brief instant when the body was most still. The heart's contraction created a microscopic tremor that traveled through the chest, the shoulder, the arms, the hands, and into the rifle. At 800 meters, that tremor could move the point of impact by inches, enough to turn a kill shot into a miss. Elena was settling into that zone now, the place between beats, the space where the body became as still as the rifle it held. "Engaging," she said quietly. Her finger moved to the trigger. The Barrett's trigger was set at 4 pounds of pull weight. She applied 3, then 3.5, then 3.75. Building pressure slowly, steadily, avoiding the sudden jerk that could throw off the shot by fractions of a degree that translated to feet at distance. 3.9. Crack. The Barrett roared. The sound was unlike anything the soldiers around her had ever heard at such close range. Not the sharp snap of an M4. Not the staccato bark of a machine gun. This was a thunderclap. A physical force that hit the eardrums and rattled the bones and left a ringing silence in its wake. The muzzle brake redirected the blast, laterally kicking up twin clouds of dust on either side of the barrel. Even with the weapon's advanced recoil mitigation systems, it bucked hard against Elena's shoulder. 23 pounds of steel and polymer slamming backward, with enough force to break an unprepared shooter's collarbone. Elena rode the recoil, absorbed it, let it flow through her body like a wave passing through water, disturbing nothing. Her eye never left the scope. Her sight picture held steady through the shot, through the recoil, through the brief moment of recovery. 830 meters away, through trees and haze and the shimmer of cold autumn air, the enemy sniper's rifle tumbled from the tree line. A moment later, his body followed, falling forward from his concealed position, landing on the frozen ground in front of the burnout vehicle. "Target down," Elena said. Her voice hadn't changed. Same tone, same cadence, same clinical detachment. As if she'd just reported the weather or read a number off a chart. She was already chambering another round. The bolt cycled with smooth mechanical precision. North Ridge, 550 meters, machine gun nest, 3 personnel. Hastings scrambled to confirm through his binoculars. He could barely see what she was describing. Shapes moving behind a pile of rubble that might be soldiers or might be shadows. At this distance, through smoke and dust, he couldn't be certain of anything. "You're certain?" "Yes." He believed her. After what he'd just witnessed, he believed her the way a man standing in the rain believes in water. "Take them." Elena adjusted her aim. 2 seconds to recalculate. Distance, wind, angle. The variables flowing through her mind like water through a stream bed following channels, carved by years of repetition. This shot was shorter, but more technically difficult. The targets were partially concealed behind rubble that would stop standard rifle rounds. 7.62, 5.56. Even some light armor-piercing ammunition would struggle to penetrate the layered stone and concrete the enemy crew had positioned behind. A normal sniper would have called it a blocked shot, would have waited for the targets to expose themselves, would have exercised patience, the sniper's greatest virtue, and hoped the enemy made a mistake. Elena didn't wait. She didn't need to, because the rubble that protected those 3 soldiers from every other weapon on the battlefield meant nothing to the weapon she held. A .50 caliber round traveling at 2,800 feet per second carried enough kinetic energy to punch through a concrete block wall and still kill a man standing on the other side. The rubble wasn't cover. It was an illusion of safety. She fired. The first soldier in the machine gun crew went down. The round punched through the rubble barrier as if it were cardboard, carrying enough residual energy to be lethal on the other side. The impact was catastrophic. 3 seconds later, she fired again. The second crew member dropped. He'd been reaching for the machine gun's charging handle, trying to bring the weapon to bear on Alpha's position. He never completed the motion. The third crew member tried to run, a natural human response to the sudden violent death of both companions. He broke cover and sprinted for a drainage ditch 15 meters behind the gun position. In the open, moving laterally across Elena's field of fire, she tracked his movement with mechanical precision, led him slightly, compensated for his speed roughly 6 miles per hour at a full sprint, calculated the bullet's flight time at this reduced distance, applied the correction, fired. 3 shots, 3 kills. Elapsed time 11 seconds. The soldiers of Alpha Platoon stared in stunned silence. Caldwell's mouth hung open. Vance had stopped reloading, his rifle fingers frozen on the magazine. Even the wounded had gone quiet, pain momentarily overridden by the spectacle of what they were witnessing. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. "Who is this girl?" The battlefield dynamics shifted immediately. The enemy advance, which had been pressing forward with the confident aggression of a force that believed it had already won, suddenly faltered. The loss of their Overwatch sniper and their primary machine gun nest in less than 30 seconds created a vacuum of confusion. Radio chatter across enemy frequencies exploded. Hastings couldn't understand the language, but he could read the tone. Surprise. Alarm. The sharp-clipped exchanges of commanders trying to understand what had just happened and how to respond. Their tactical cohesion, so impressive moments before, began to crack, like a windshield struck by a stone. The fracture started small, a single point of failure, but it was spreading. They had expected resistance. They had expected the desperate, inaccurate fire of a surrounded infantry platoon fighting for survival. They had not expected this. Elena worked with relentless efficiency. Her next target was an officer. She identified him not by insignia, which was invisible at this range, but by behavior. The way other soldiers deferred to his position, the way he moved with authority between cover points, directing troops, coordinating the advance. The subtle body language of command that was the same in every military in the world. He was directing troops from behind an overturned truck. Range 940 meters. Wind had shifted slightly, now coming from 10 o'clock at 14 miles per hour. A quartering headwind that would push the bullet right and slow it fractionally. She compensated, adjusted her windage turret 2 clicks right, added a quarter minute of elevation to account for the headwind's drag. Fired. The officer collapsed. His radio fell from his hand. The soldiers around him scattered like startled birds, abandoning their positions, seeking cover from a threat they couldn't see and couldn't fight. "Command element disrupted," Elena reported to Hastings. Her voice remained steady, unchanged. A machine producing data. "They're going to pull back to reorganize, reestablish their chain of command. How long do we have? 3 minutes, maybe 4. She was already scanning for her next target. Her eye moved behind the scope in tiny increments, quartering the battlefield with systematic precision. They'll try to establish new firing positions with better concealment. When they advance again, it'll be more cautious. Slower. Slower is good, Hastings said. Slower keeps my soldiers alive. Elena didn't respond. She'd found another target. A soldier setting up what looked like a mortar tube on a ridgeline 1,100 meters to the west. Through her scope, she could see his hands working the base plate into position, leveling the weapon, preparing to drop high-explosive rounds directly onto Alpha's defensive perimeter. Long shot. 1,200 meters. Extreme distance for most marksmen. At the outer edge of effective range for many sniper systems. But still within the M17 Barrett's operational envelope. She steadied her breathing. The mathematics ran through her mind automatically, now processed by a part of her brain that had been trained through endless repetition to calculate ballistics, the way most people calculated the distance to the door. Bullet drop at 1,200 meters would be significant. The .50 caliber round, despite its enormous muzzle velocity, was still subject to gravity. From the moment it left the barrel, it was falling. At this distance, she'd need to aim roughly 18 feet above the target to compensate for the arc of the bullet's trajectory. Wind drift would push the round approximately 4 feet left over that distance. The wind had been consistent, but at extreme range, even small variations in air current between her position and the target could compound into significant displacement. The bullet's flight time would be just over 2 seconds. 2 seconds where the target could move, could bend down, could step behind cover. 2 seconds where 1,000 variables she couldn't control could render the shot meaningless. Elena didn't hesitate. She'd made this shot before. 100 times in training, a dozen times in the field, in places she wasn't supposed to be, against targets she wasn't supposed to know about, on missions that would never appear in any official record. She fired. The mortar tube exploded. The 50 caliber round struck the ammunition supply stacked beside the weapon. The high explosive incendiary properties of the Mk211 round ignited the mortar propellant charges which detonated the ready rounds, which created a chain reaction of secondary explosions that rippled outward in an expanding sphere of fire and shrapnel. The crew disappeared in the blast. 2 nearby soldiers who'd been too close were thrown off their feet by the concussion wave. Others dove for cover, abandoning their positions. They advanced their carefully rehearsed assault plan. Indirect fire capability eliminated, Elena said. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, something shifted inside the soldiers of Alpha Platoon. Something fundamental. Something that couldn't be undone. They had been dying. Pinned down, surrounded, outnumbered, bleeding out on a frozen Montana ridgeline, with no hope of rescue and no plan for survival. They had been watching the clock wind down on their own lives, counting the minutes until the enemy closed to grenade range and ended it. And then, this woman had stood up. This quiet, invisible woman that none of them had noticed, that none of them had spoken to, that none of them could have picked out of a lineup an hour ago. She had stood up, pulled a rifle from her pack like a magician pulling a sword from a stone, and in the space of 6 shots and less than 3 minutes, she had killed a sniper at 800 meters, destroyed a machine gun nest, eliminated an enemy officer, and turned a mortar position into a smoking crater. 6 shots, 6 targets, 0 misses. Private Emmett Caldwell would later tell his family that watching Elena Graves work was like watching a surgeon operate. No wasted movement, no emotion, no hesitation, just the clean, precise application of extraordinary skill to an impossible situation. He'd spent his whole life watching his father work cattle on their Iowa farm, and the only comparison he could think of was the way his old man could look at a herd of 600 head and know instantly which animal was sick. Some people just saw what others couldn't. Elena Graves saw everything. Hastings was beginning to understand the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just accurate shooting. This was not merely a soldier with a good rifle making lucky shots under pressure. This was battlefield architecture. Deliberate, calculated destruction of the enemy's ability to fight as a coordinated unit. Every target Elena selected served a strategic purpose. Command elements first to create confusion. Fire support second to remove their ability to suppress Alpha's position. Communication nodes third to prevent them from adapting. She was dismantling their war machine 1 precision round at a time. Graves, he said slowly, the realization settling over him like snow. You're not just a sniper. You're a force multiplier. She chambered another round. The bolt's metallic click was the only sound she made. Shadowline trained us to operate independently in denied territory. No support, no backup, no extraction plan. We had to be able to influence entire engagements alone. Shape the battle space. Create conditions for victory without ever being seen. A pause, so brief it might have been imagined. I haven't done this in 18 months. You haven't lost a step. For the first time since she'd started shooting, Elena's expression flickered. Something passed across her face like a cloud crossing the sun. Not pride, something darker, heavier. The shadow of a memory she'd spent 18 months trying to outrun. That's what I'm afraid of, she murmured. The whisper spread through Alpha Platoon like fire through dry grass. Nora Priestley had gotten close enough during a brief lull to see the rifle's stock. Scratched into the black polymer, barely visible unless you knew to look, were 2 initials. R.G. Reaper Graves, Priestley murmured, crouching behind the barrier. What? Caldwell asked beside her. Priestley's eyes widened. She grabbed his arm. Remember last year, that classified briefing about operations in the mountain sectors? They showed us 1 slide. Just 1. About sniper operations that saved an entire battalion from an ambush in territory we weren't supposed to be in. Vaguely, they didn't give details. Said it was need to know. But there was a call sign mentioned, just once. Spoken, not written. Reaper. Caldwell stared at her. So, the story was that one operator single-handed took out 23 enemy fighters in 40 minutes, including 3 counter-snipers sent specifically to eliminate her. Priestley looked across the trench at Elena, at the small, quiet woman behind the massive rifle. Look at the initials on her stock. R.G. Reaper Graves. The rumor spread through what remained of Alpha Platoon within minutes. Every soldier was staring at Elena now. The quiet logistics clerk who'd barely spoken since joining them was allegedly one of the most lethal snipers in recent military history. A ghost. A legend. A woman who wasn't supposed to exist. Hastings heard the whispers. He moved back to Elena's position and crouched beside her as she checked her remaining rounds. 4 left in the first magazine. The second magazine, 10 rounds, sat ready in her chest rig. We need to talk, he said quietly. We're still in active combat, Sergeant. My soldiers think you're someone called Reaper. Shadowline operative. Supposed to be dead or retired or disappeared into whatever hole the government puts people it wants to forget. He paused. Want to tell me if they're right? Elena's hand stilled on the rifle. For a long moment, she didn't respond. The sounds of combat continued around them, the crackle of distant gunfire, the moan of the wind across the ridge. But between them, there was silence. Then she sighed. A heavy sound, full of old weight. The kind of exhale that carries years inside it. Diane Rawlings was my instructor, she said quietly. Major Diane Specker. Spectre Rawlings, best sniper the program ever produced. Could read wind at 2,000 meters by watching how dust moved on a rock face. Could calculate ballistic solutions faster than any computer I've ever used. She taught me everything. Not just how to shoot, how to think, how to see. Another pause. Longer this time. Elena's eyes stayed on the scope, but Hastings could tell she wasn't seeing the battlefield anymore. She was seeing something else. Someone else. She died 3 years ago. Enemy ambush during an Overwatch mission. I inherited her call sign. So you are Reaper. Elena's voice went flat. The way metal goes flat when it's been hammered too many times. I left Shadowline after Diane died. Requested transfer to non-combat duty. I told them I was done. Done with the killing. Done with the mathematics of who lives and who dies. Done with looking through a scope and making God's decisions with the trigger pull. They let you go? After I completed one final mission, Hastings waited. The wind cut across the ridge carrying the smell of cordite and frozen earth and blood. What mission? He prompted gently. Elimination of the enemy commander responsible for the ambush that killed Diane and her team. Extreme long-range shot. 1,900 meters. Urban terrain. 3 civilians within the blast radius of a miss. High wind. Marginal light. Did you make the shot? Yes. The word was barely a whisper. A sound made of breath and grief and something that might have been shame. But by the time the intelligence reached us, by the time I got into position, by the time I pulled the trigger, Diane had been dead for 16 hours. The mission was revenge, not rescue. I completed it. Then I walked away. Elena's voice remained steady through the telling, but her hands betrayed her. The fingers that had been so impossibly still behind the Barrett's trigger were trembling now. Tiny tremors barely visible like the surface of a pond, disturbed by a stone dropped from a great height. She noticed, clenched her fists once. The trembling stopped. 3 years of practice hiding the fractures. They investigated, held a review board, cleared me of any wrongdoing, said I acted appropriately given the circumstances. Her voice turned bitter, hard-edged and cold as the Montana wind. Then, they gave me a commendation, promoted me, sent me back out as if Diane was just an acceptable loss. Just another name on a wall somewhere. Just another star on a ceiling in a building in Virginia that most Americans don't even know exists. Hastings said nothing for a long moment. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound hollow against the enormity of what she'd just shared. 3 seconds, the span of a single breath, the time it took to blink twice. An eternity when measured in human life. So you hid, he said finally. Requested logistics duty. Somewhere you'd never have to look through a scope again. I didn't hide. The sharpness in her voice cut like a blade. I withdrew? There's a difference. I still served. I still wore the uniform. She trailed off, and for the first time her composure cracked. Just slightly. Just enough for Hastings to see the person beneath the operator. I couldn't be that person anymore. Reaper was someone who killed without hesitation, who traded lives like currency on a balance sheet. I wanted to be someone else. Someone who didn't carry the weight of 3 seconds on her shoulders every time she closed her eyes. And yet here you are, Hastings said gently, rifle in hand, saving lives instead of just taking them. Elena looked down at the Barrett, the weapon that had been her constant companion through years of Shadowline operations, the tool of her trade, the instrument of her greatest successes and her deepest regrets. Diane used to say something, Elena said quietly. She said every bullet we fire changes the world. Sometimes it saves 1,000 people we'll never meet. Sometimes it destroys something we can't see. We never know which. We just have to trust that we're doing more good than harm. Do you trust that? Hastings asked. Elena stared at the rifle, at her hands wrapped around it, at the smoke rising from a battlefield she'd just reshaped with 6 rounds and 11 seconds of work. I used to, she said. Diane taught me to believe it, but after she died, she trailed off. Through the scope movement, the enemy was reorganizing. Fresh officers taking command. New formations assembling behind cover. The machine was repairing itself, preparing for another push. "They're coming back," Elena said. The personal moment evaporated. The operator returned cold and precise and ready. Reinforced. More cautious. "They know what we have now." Hastings looked at her. At this woman who carried 3 years of grief in her bones and 18 months of silence in her throat. Who had hidden herself behind a logistics transfer and an oversized backpack. Who had just saved 20 lives with a rifle she'd sworn she'd never touch again. "Diane would be proud of you," he said. Elena's finger found the trigger guard. Her eyes settled behind the scope. Her breathing slowed to the deep measured rhythm that preceded killing. "Diane would tell me I'm being an idiot," she said. But there was the faintest trace of something at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, not yet, but the memory of one. She always said dwelling on past mistakes was a waste of cognitive resources better spent on present survival. Sounds like a wise woman. "She was the best of us." Elena's expression softened. Just for a heartbeat. Just long enough for Hastings to glimpse the woman behind the weapon. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold focus of a predator that had spotted movement in the distance. "Sergeant," she said. "They're setting up new positions. I count 3 fire teams, an additional machine gun, and what looks like a command element establishing an observation post on the northern ridge." She chambered around. The bolt closed with a sound like a door locking. "The next phase is going to be harder. They know about me now. They'll use better cover. Move faster. Try to close the distance where my range advantage disappears." Hastings nodded. "What do you need?" "Time," Elena said. "And for your soldiers to stay down when I tell them to stay down. What's coming next won't be pretty." She settled deeper behind the scope. The crosshairs found a distant figure. Enemy officer. New command element. Already giving orders. Already rebuilding the machine she'd dismantled. Down below the ridge, the enemy force was reorganizing with impressive speed. New officers stepping into dead men's roles. Fresh communication channels being established. Fire teams reshuffling, absorbing casualties, reforming into functional units. It was the mark of a professional military force. You could kill their leaders, destroy their equipment, shatter their formations, and they would rebuild. Every time. Because the doctrine was in their bones, and doctrine survived the men who carried it. Elena counted them through her scope. Methodical. Free. Thorough. The way a surgeon counts instruments before closing. 60+ combat effectives remaining. Down from roughly 70 at the start of the engagement. She'd killed perhaps 8 or 9, wounded others, destroyed key weapon systems and disrupted their command structure. But they still outnumbered Alpha nearly 5-1, and they were angry now. She could see it in the way they moved. Faster, more aggressive. The careful professionalism of the initial assault replaced by something harder, something personal. They'd lost friends, comrades, leaders, and they knew who had done it. Somewhere out there, someone was planning specifically for her. Developing tactics to neutralize her. Studying the angles of her shots, the positions she'd fired from calculating her capabilities and her limitations. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Elena knew this. She'd been on the other side of it enough times to recognize the pattern. First came the confusion, then came the anger, then came the plan. And the plan, when it came, would be designed to do one thing: kill her. She checked her ammunition. 4 rounds remaining in the current magazine. 10 more in the spare. 14 total. Each one a decision. Each one a life she would take, or a life she would save, depending on which way the bullet flew and what it found at the end of its journey. 14 rounds. 60 enemies. And a promise she'd made to a dead woman 3 years ago that she'd broken the moment she opened that rifle case. Elena found her breathing rhythm. The space between heartbeats stretched out, and in that space, she found the stillness she needed. "Every bullet changes the world," she whispered. Words spoken to no one. Words spoken to a ghost. Words spoken to herself, by herself, for herself. A promise renewed. A debt acknowledged. A woman stepping back into the skin she'd shed 18 months ago because 27 soldiers needed her to be the thing she'd sworn she would never be again. She exhaled halfway, held, and in the silence between one heartbeat and the next, Reaper went back to work. The smoke came first, tactical. Dozens of smoke grenades arcing. Tactical. Dozens of smoke grenades arcing through the cold Montana air, trailing white phosphorus tails landing in a precise pattern across the open ground between the enemy positions and Ember Ridge. Within 60 seconds, the battlefield disappeared. A wall of dense white chemical smoke stretched from the northern tree line to the southern gully, 300 meters wide and growing. The wind pushed it toward Alpha's position, thickening the curtain, filling the gaps, turning the world into a featureless white void, where distance lost its meaning and direction became a guess. "They're masking their approach," Corporal Jesse Vance called out from his position near the western barrier. His voice carried the tight control of a veteran who understood exactly what he was seeing and exactly how bad it was. "We're blind." Sergeant Rowan Hastings moved to the edge of the defensive line, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Useless. The smoke was too thick, too uniform. He could see perhaps 30 meters into the white wall before everything dissolved into nothing. Beyond that curtain, 60 enemy soldiers were advancing. He could hear them, boots on frozen ground, the metallic clatter of equipment, muffled commands in a language he didn't speak. They were coming, and he couldn't see them. "All positions hold fire," Hastings ordered. "Conserve ammunition. Don't shoot at what you can't identify." It was the right order. The textbook order. But it felt like surrendering, like standing in a dark room, knowing someone was coming through the door, and choosing not to raise your weapon because you couldn't see which door. "I see them," Elena's voice. Calm. Unchanged. As if the smoke that had blinded every other soldier on the ridge was an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. Hastings turned. She was behind the Barrett eye, pressed to the scope body, still as carved stone. But something was different about the scope itself. The main optic tube had a secondary attachment mounted on top, a compact module he hadn't noticed before. Custom hardware. Non-standard. The kind of modification that didn't come from any supply catalog he'd ever seen. "Through that," Hastings said, incredulous. "Through all that smoke?" "Thermal imaging overlay," Elena replied. "Custom edition. Picks up heat signatures through obscurance. Smoke, fog, light, rain. The bodies on the other side are 37 degrees warmer than the ambient air. Through this scope, they light up like torches." She paused. Her finger moved to the trigger guard. "I count 43 signatures advancing in 3 echelons. Lead element is approximately 200 meters out and closing. They're using standard smoke advance doctrine, moving fast. They expect to be inside our perimeter within 4 minutes." Hastings processed this. 43 soldiers advancing behind a smokescreen they believed made them invisible. 4 minutes from overrunning a position held by 12 combat-effective defenders. Can you work through it? The smoke affects bullet trajectory. Density variations create unpredictable drag. Wind is swirling through the chemical cloud, not flowing cleanly. Each shot requires individual calculation. She chambered around. "But yes, I can work through it." "Then work." Elena's breathing slowed. Deep. Controlled. The rhythm that preceded killing. Her heart rate descended into the low 40s, a physiological state that most human beings could not achieve without pharmaceutical assistance. She had trained her autonomic nervous system the way a pianist trained their fingers through thousands of hours of deliberate practice until the extraordinary became automatic. She acquired her first target. Enemy squad leader. 720 meters. Moving through thick smoke. His thermal signature was bright and clear through the overlay, a human-shaped bloom of heat against the cold Montana landscape. He was gesturing to his squad, directing movement, maintaining formation discipline, even while advancing blind. Wind gusting from 2 o'clock at 16 miles per hour, but eddying around the smoke clouds, creating pockets of turbulence that could push the bullet off course by inches that mattered. Temperature differential between the warm smoke and the cold air above it would create a thermal boundary layer. The bullet would pass through that layer twice during its flight, each transition introducing a small but measurable deflection. She added a half-minute of angle adjustment for the smoke density, compensated for the thermal boundary effect, calculated the wind's probable behavior across the bullet's flight path, not as a single value, but as a gradient, stronger near the ground, weaker above, swirling where the smoke met clean air. She fired. The heat signature dropped, 1 down. Immediately, she shifted to the next target. Assistant leader. 680 meters. Angling left, trying to maintain spacing from his squad leader. A smart instinct. Spreading out reduced the effectiveness of area weapons. It did nothing against a precision shooter with thermal optics. Elena compensated for his movement, the wind shift, the distance difference. Fired. The signature collapsed. 2 down. The enemy advance began to falter. Even through the smoke, they could hear the Barrett's distinctive report. That massive, thunderous crack that no other weapon on the battlefield could produce. A sound that meant death had found them again, reaching through the white curtain they believed would protect them, finding them with impossible precision. Elena worked with mechanical efficiency. Each shot a separate equation. Each equation solved in the space between one breath and the next. Third target, machine gunner. 600 meters. Running. She led him by 3 body widths, accounting for his speed and the bullet's flight time at that range. Fired. He pitched forward mid-stride, weapon tumbling from his hands. Fourth target. Radio operator. 700 meters. Stationary. He'd stopped to transmit, crouching behind what he thought was concealment. Through thermal, his radio's battery pack glowed almost as brightly as his body. She put the round through both. His transmission ended mid-syllable. The last 4 rounds in the first magazine went fast. 5th target. 6th. 7th. 8th. Each shot requiring split-second recalculation as conditions constantly changed. Wind velocity shifting with every gust. Target movement unpredictable. Smoke density varying as the grenades burned through their chemical loads, and the wind tore holes in the curtain only to fill them again. The bolt locked back on an empty magazine. Elena ejected it smooth and fast, and seated the second magazine with a sharp click. 10 rounds remaining. She charged the bolt and was firing again in under 2 seconds. 9th target. 10th. 11th. Jesus, Nora Priestley breathed from her position. She'd been watching Elena's shooting through a gap in the sandbags. Not the distant targets which were invisible through the smoke, but Elena herself. The woman behind the rifle. The absolute stillness between shots. The mechanical precision of each bolt cycle. The complete absence of hesitation or doubt. She's dropping them like it's a training range, like they're paper targets. But the enemy had numbers. For every soldier Elena eliminated, 2 more pressed forward through the smoke. They were paying a terrible price for their advance, losing men at a rate that would have broken a less disciplined force. But they were accepting that price. Absorbing the casualties, pushing forward through the storm of precision fire, because somewhere behind them, a commander had calculated that one sniper, no matter how skilled, could not stop a determined assault by 60 soldiers. They might have been right if not for one thing. Elena wasn't just shooting to kill. She was shooting to demoralize. Her next target was an officer. She identified him through thermal by his equipment profile, the bulkier signature of a radio-packed sidearm and command tablet, and by his position behind the forward elements. Long shot. 890 meters through shifting smoke. He was standing still, studying a tablet, trusting the smoke to protect him. Elena put a round through his center mass. The enemy formation's cohesion cracked. Without their officer's leadership, the advancing soldiers lost their organized rhythm. Some tried to push forward on momentum alone. Others hesitated. A few began falling back, survival instinct overriding discipline. "They're breaking," Hastings said, watching through his binoculars as the smoke began to thin and the enemy advance stalled. "You broke them." Elena didn't celebrate. She was already scanning the enemy's rear positions through her thermal overlay. Reading the battlefield the way a chess master reads a board, not just the current position, but the positions that would follow. And she found something that made her blood run cold. "Sergeant," she said urgently, 600 meters behind their lines. They're setting up electronic equipment, jamming antennas. And I see drone cases, military grade. "Oh, some," Hastings frowned. "We're already cut off. What are they jamming?" "Not our communications. Theirs." Elena adjusted her scope, studying the equipment being assembled. 2 soldiers were working with practiced efficiency, unfolding a portable antenna array, while a third unpacked what were unmistakably reconnaissance drone housings. Small, fast camera-equipped quadcopters designed for precision target acquisition. "They're preparing to push a drone swarm through to map our exact positions," Elena said, her voice grim. "Then they'll call in precision strikes, artillery or mortars dialed into the meter. They're setting up their own radio silence so the drone frequencies don't interfere with their comms." That changed everything. If the enemy mapped Alpha's defensive positions with drones, they could drop rounds with surgical precision. No area bombardment needed. No waste. Just accurate, devastating fire on every foxhole, every barrier, every position where a soldier was hiding. Alpha platoon would be erased. "Can you stop it?" Hastings asked. Elena studied the targets. The equipment was behind significant cover, partially shielded by concrete barriers the enemy had dragged into position. The operators were moving quickly, professionally. This wasn't a single shot. This was a series of shots, each one requiring precision at distance, while under potential return fire. "I need cover," she said. "They're going to know exactly where I am after the first round. I need your soldiers to keep enemy heads down while I work." Hastings grabbed his radio handset. Local squad communications were still functional. "All elements. Suppressive fire on western approach. Keep them pinned for 30 seconds. Alpha's soldiers responded immediately. Rifles barked. The remaining machine gun roared. Even the grenadiers lobbed rounds toward enemy concentrations. It wasn't accurate fire at these ranges. It didn't need to be. It just needed to make the enemy cautious enough to keep them from firing back effectively. Elena focused on her first target, the drone operator. He was moving behind a concrete barrier, only visible in brief glimpses as he adjusted the equipment. She'd have to time her shot perfectly, catching him during one of those exposed moments. She watched, waited. 3 seconds of exposure as he repositioned the drone controller. She fired. The operator went down. Immediately returned fire, zeroed in on her position. Bullets smacked into the sandbags around her, tearing through fabric and sending sand spraying. One round passed within inches of her head. Elena had already shifted slightly, just enough to throw off the enemy's aim. She found her second target, a soldier connecting the jamming antenna's power supply. Longer shot, more difficult angle. He was kneeling, presenting a smaller profile. She made the calculation in less than a second. Fired. The soldier collapsed. The antenna toppled. More return fire. Heavier now. Multiple weapons converging on her suspected location. Hastings watched in horror as the defensive wall around Elena was systematically shredded by incoming rounds. "Graves, pull back," he shouted. She ignored him. One more target. The drone control unit itself. If she could destroy it, the entire system would be inoperable, regardless of whether replacement operators arrived. But the unit was small, barely the size of a briefcase, partially hidden behind sandbags, and the fallen body of the first operator. It required a perfect shot. Elena found her breathing rhythm again. The world narrowed to just her, the scope, the target. Everything else faded to background noise. She exhaled halfway. Held. Squeezed. The Barrett thundered. 800 meters away, the control unit exploded in a shower of sparks and shattered electronics. The drone cases beside it cracked open from the concussion, their contents ruined. "Drone capability eliminated," Elena reported calmly. Then, almost as an afterthought, "I need to reload. I'm out." But there was no reload. She'd fired her last round. Both magazines were empty. The Barrett was silent. Elena stared at the empty chamber for a long moment. Then she reached into the bottom of her pack, into a compartment she hadn't opened in 18 months. Inside were loose rounds individually wrapped in foam. Spares she'd carried out of habit, the way a smoker who'd quit still kept a lighter in a drawer. 12 rounds. Not in a magazine. They'd have to be loaded one at a time directly into the chamber. Slower, but functional. 12 rounds, and whatever came next. The intensity of combat had driven most conscious thought from the soldiers' minds. But as the enemy began a tactical withdrawal to regroup, questions emerged. Emmett Caldwell crouched beside Corporal Vance, both of them staring at Elena as she methodically cleaned carbon fouling from her rifle's chamber. "That's not normal," Caldwell said quietly. "That's not even elite. That's something else." Vance nodded slowly. He was a 6-year veteran, had deployed twice before this, seen plenty of trained marksmen. What Elena had just demonstrated went beyond training. It was artistry mixed with cold lethality. "The way she doesn't react to incoming fire," Vance said. "I've only seen that kind of composure in one type of soldier." "What type?" Vance hesitated. "The kind that scares me." The lull lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes of relative quiet, where the only sounds were the wind, the groaning of damaged structures, and the distant chaos of the enemy trying to reorganize. 11 minutes where the soldiers of Alpha Platoon tended their wounded, redistributed ammunition, reinforced damaged positions. Private Kyle Weber was bad. The medic had stabilized him, packed the wound, started a field IV, but the blood loss was significant. His skin was the color of old paper. His eyes kept drifting. He needed surgery. He needed a hospital. He needed to be anywhere except a frozen ridgeline in Montana, with enemy forces regrouping below. When Hastings returned to Elena's position, he found her loading loose rounds one at a time, chambering the first with a deliberate pull of the bolt. 12 rounds, she said without looking up. "Loose. No magazine. I have to single load each one. That's everything I have left. Will it be enough? Depends on what they throw at us next." She set the rifle carefully aside and stared at her hands. They were steady, the hands of a professional sniper, but she was looking at them like they belonged to someone else. For a moment, just a moment, she closed her eyes. She'd promised herself she was done. 18 months ago, she'd put the Barrett in its case, locked the latches, and sworn that Elena Graves would never again be the woman behind that scope. Reaper was dead, buried alongside Diane Rawlings in a classified grave that no one would ever visit. She'd taken a logistics posting, moved paper, counted inventory, lived the quiet, invisible life of someone who had chosen peace over purpose. And now Reaper was back, killing with the same terrible efficiency, making the same cold calculations, feeling the same detachment that had frightened her more than any enemy ever had. Because the detachment was easy. That was the part that scared her most. How natural it felt. How simple it was to look through a scope and see targets instead of people. How quickly 18 months of silence could be erased by the familiar weight of a rifle against her shoulder. She opened her eyes and continued. The enemy's assault had collapsed completely. Without their drone capability, without their officers, the assault force disintegrated into disconnected groups of frightened soldiers. Alpha Platoon had held, against overwhelming odds, outnumbered 3-1, cut off from support. They had held. Because of one woman with a rifle, then came the counter-sniper team. It started 20 minutes into the lull. Elena was scanning the enemy's rear positions when she noticed movement on the southern ridge. Not infantry, not the blundering, obvious repositioning of soldiers who'd been rattled by her shooting. This was different. Two figures, moving with deliberate, practiced efficiency, using terrain like professionals, never skylining themselves against the ridgeline, advancing in short, calculated bounds, each one ending behind pre-selected cover. One carried a rifle case. The other carried a spotting scope and a rangefinder, shooter and spotter. A dedicated sniper team. "Sergeant," Elena said quietly, "we have a problem. Counter-sniper team, 2 personnel, 800 meters in closing." Hastings tried to find them with his binoculars. He saw nothing, just rock and scrub and the gray-brown landscape of Montana autumn. "I can't see them." "You're not supposed to?" "They're good, very good." She tracked the pair through her scope, studying their movement, reading their tactics. "They're doing exactly what I would do." The sniper team settled into position behind a natural rock formation. Through her scope, Elena could see the shooter assembling his weapon. The spotter was already glassing Alpha's position, searching for her in a systematic grid pattern. "They haven't found me yet," Elena said. "But they will. My last firing position left blast marks on the sandbags. I have maybe 3 minutes before they acquire me." Elena's mind worked through scenarios, training exercises she'd run 100 times. Shadowline had prepared her for exactly this situation. "I need to make them think I'm somewhere I'm not," she said. The idea took shape in less than 30 seconds. A damaged helmet, a torn uniform jacket, wooden support poles, and one critical element, a spent brass casing positioned where it would catch the weak autumn sunlight. A perfect simulation of scope reflection, the exact tell she'd used to identify the enemy sniper earlier. "Give me 3 minutes," she said to Hastings, "and keep everyone away from the eastern barrier." The decoy took shape with remarkable speed. Helmet propped on poles at the correct height. Jacket stretched across to suggest a human outline. The brass casing positioned to catch light. At 800 meters through haze and heat shimmer, it would pass. She was offering them a gift they wouldn't be able to refuse. Elena moved to her real firing position 30 feet away from the decoy, hidden behind a chunk of collapsed concrete wall that offered minimal protection, but complete concealment from the southern ridge. "They'll fire on it," she said, "and when they do, they'll reveal their exact positions." The trap was set. The enemy took the bait faster than expected. Elena watched the spotter find the decoy, watched him signal his partner, watched both men shift their attention to the eastern barrier. But when they fired, it wasn't 2 shots, it was 4. The counter-sniper team had backup. 2 additional shooters she hadn't detected concealed in secondary positions flanking the primary team. A crossfire pattern, 4 weapons converging on a single point. Heavy rounds slammed into the eastern barrier. The decoy disintegrated. Sandbags exploded. If Elena had been there, she would have died instantly. But she wasn't there. And now all 4 shooters were exposed. Their muzzle flashes had marked their positions as clearly as signal flares. Elena fired. The leftmost shooter went down, cycled the bolt, shifted aim. Second shooter, 780 meters. He was scrambling, trying to understand why his kill shot had missed. She didn't give him time. Fired. He collapsed. The third shooter tried to relocate. Fast. professional, already rolling sideways, breaking her targeting solution. Elena tracked him, led him, fired. He dropped mid-stride. The fourth shooter was the dangerous one. He didn't run. He'd already identified Elena's actual position and was bringing his rifle around. It became a race. Two snipers separated by 800 meters each trying to fire first. Both rifles fired, the reports reaching each shooter at nearly the same instant. Elena felt the impact. Not on her body, on the concrete barrier 6 inches from her left temple. The enemy round struck with enough force to crater the surface and send a spray of fragments across her face. Blood began running from tiny cuts on her cheek and forehead. 6 inches. The distance between alive and dead. Her round had traveled the same distance in the same time. The fourth shooter fell backward, rifle tumbling from his grasp. All counter-sniper elements eliminated, Elena reported. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Hastings to notice before she clenched her fists and the tremor disappeared. Elena wiped blood from her face with the back of her hand. 8 rounds remaining, single load only. "Sergeant," she said, "we don't have long. That was their first response. The next one will be heavier." She was right. Within minutes, the enemy situation changed dramatically. Emmett Caldwell called out from his observation post. His voice carried the particular quality of a man trying very hard to sound professional while being absolutely terrified. "Sergeant, movement on the North Ridge. Heavy movement. Vehicles. A lot of vehicles." Hastings moved to see. Vance followed, binoculars already rising. What they found made both men go silent. The enemy hadn't just regrouped. They'd reinforced. At least another company's worth of soldiers was moving into position. Fresh troops, unbloodied, organized into clean formations. And they'd brought hardware, armored personnel carriers. 3 of them heavy diesel engines growling as they negotiated the mountain terrain. Vehicle-mounted heavy weapons, and behind the vehicles, mobile artillery. 2 truck-mounted mortar systems with computerized fire control. "That's not a probe," Hastings said. His voice was grim. "That's an annihilation force." Elena scanned the enemy deployment through her scope. "They're not taking chances this time," she observed. "They're going to flatten this entire ridge. Bombardment first, then armored advance, then infantry sweep through the rubble to confirm kills. Can we hold?" Elena ran the mathematics. 8 rounds remaining, each one requiring a manual chamber load. 12 combat-effective soldiers with standard infantry weapons. Against 3 armored vehicles, mobile artillery, and roughly a company of fresh infantry. The numbers told a simple, brutal story. "No," she said. "We can't hold, not against that. Then we retreat. Fighting withdrawals south through the... They've covered it." Elena's interruption was quiet but absolute. "Look at their deployment. They've positioned blocking forces on every viable withdrawal route. Southern Gully, Eastern Slope, the logging road to the northwest. All covered." She lowered the scope and looked at Hastings directly. Her eyes were calm, clear. The eyes of someone who had already accepted what came next and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "This is a kill box, Sergeant. They've built it around us while we were focused on the assault. Every retreat route is covered. Every escape path is blocked." She let the words sink in. "We can't hold, and we can't run." The wind cut across Ember Ridge, carrying the sound of diesel engines and the distant clank of tracked vehicles moving into position. The sound of a trap closing. "Then what do we do?" Hastings asked, hearing the desperation creep into his voice. Elena turned from Hastings. She looked up at the observation tower, the old partially collapsed structure that rose above the ridge like a broken finger pointing at the sky. Damaged by previous battles. Structurally compromised. Missing entire sections of wall and floor. Exposed to fire from every direction. But tall. The highest point on Ember Ridge. The one position that offered clear, unobstructed sightlines to every enemy formation surrounding them. A perfect sniper's perch. And a perfect coffin. "I have an idea," Elena said slowly. "But you're not going to like it." "Tell me." "I need to get to the top of that tower. It's the only position with sightlines to all enemy formations simultaneously. From there, I can engage their command structure, their fire support, and their vehicle crews." Hastings understood immediately what she was proposing. "That's a death trap," he said. "You'd be completely exposed." "Yes." "It's suicide." Elena met his eyes. And in that moment, Hastings saw something he hadn't seen before. Not the cold professional, not the grieving survivor. The quiet, absolute resolve of a person who had found the one thing worth dying for. "It's calculated risk," she said. "And it's our only option. I go up. I draw their entire focus onto me. Every weapon they have fires at that tower instead of your soldiers. And while they're focused on killing me, you take the platoon south through the gully. You want to be the bait. More than that, I'll create enough chaos in their formations that they'll be too disorganized to pursue. By the time they realize the platoon has withdrawn, you'll be beyond effective pursuit range. And what happens to you? Elena looked at the tower, at the broken concrete and exposed rebar and the empty spaces where walls used to be. I do what I was trained to do, she said quietly. I hold the line, alone. Hastings wanted to refuse. He'd spent 14 years in the army believing that no soldier should be left behind, that every life under his command carried equal weight. That leadership meant finding the option that brought everyone home. But combat didn't care about beliefs. Combat offered hard choices and insufficient time and the cold, simple mathematics of survival. One life against 27. One woman who had already decided. He looked at Elena Graves, at the quiet logistics clerk who had turned out to be something else entirely, at the woman who had spent 18 months running from who she was and had stopped running the moment other people needed her to. How long can you hold? He asked. The words tasted like ashes. Elena looked at him and smiled. Small, brief. The first real smile he'd seen from her. Long enough, she said. That's all that matters. She picked up the Barrett, held it for a moment, felt its weight. 23 pounds of steel and polymer and purpose. Diane used to say that the hardest part of being a sniper isn't the shooting, she said quietly. It's the choosing. Choosing who lives. Choosing who dies. Choosing to carry that weight every single day and still getting out of bed in the morning. She looked at Hastings. Today, the choice is simple. For the first time in 3 years, the choice is simple. She turned toward the tower. Get your people ready to move, Sergeant. When you hear the Barrett, you run, and you don't look back. The first artillery round hit the ridge 40 meters to Elena's left as she broke cover and ran. She'd been running toward things that could kill her for most of her adult life. Toward gunfire. Toward hostile positions. Toward the places on a battlefield where the air turned to metal and the ground opened up and swallowed men whole. But running across open ground under active artillery bombardment was different. There was no cover, no concealment, no tactic or technique that could protect a human body from a high-explosive shell landing within its lethal radius. There was only speed, and luck, and the mathematics of probability that said if enough shells fell in a large enough area, some spaces between them would remain untouched. Elena ran for those spaces. The second shell landed behind her, close enough that the blast pressure hit her back like a shove from a giant hand. She stumbled, kept her feet, kept running. The Barrett weighed 23 pounds in her arms, plus the weight of the scope, the bipod, the 8 loose rounds stuffed in her cargo pocket. Nearly 30 pounds of precision machinery that she carried like a child carries a favorite blanket clutched tight against her chest, protected by her body. The observation tower was 600 meters from Alpha's defensive line. 600 meters of open exposed ridgeline with no cover taller than knee-high scrub brush. 600 meters that she had to cross while artillery shells fell in a pattern designed to saturate the entire ridge with fragmentation. She read the pattern as she ran, not consciously, not the way a mathematician reads an equation on a blackboard, the way a musician reads rhythm, the way a bird reads wind. The shells were falling in a grid pattern east to west with approximately 4-second intervals between impacts. Each shell's blast radius was 50 meters. The grid spacing was roughly 60 meters, which meant there were gaps. 10-meter windows between kill zones where a person could exist briefly without being torn apart. The windows moved as the grid advanced, shifting west with each new volley, creating a rolling wave of destruction that swept across the ridge like a slow-motion tsunami. Elena timed her movement to the gaps. Sprint. Drop. Wait for the next impact. Feel the ground heave beneath her. Feel the shrapnel whisper overhead. Then up. Sprint again. 30 meters. Drop. Wait. Impact. Up. Sprint. It was insane. It was impossible. It was the only way. Private Emmett Caldwell watched her go from his position in the trench. Beside him, Nora Priestley was gripping the sandbag wall so hard her knuckles had gone white. She's reading the artillery pattern, Priestley whispered. She's actually reading it, timing her movement between the shells. That's not possible, Caldwell said. Watch her. They watched. The entire platoon watched. 27 soldiers crouched in their defensive positions preparing to run for their lives. The moment Elena's rifle spoke from the tower, watched one woman sprint across a killing field that should have been impassable. A shell landed directly in her path. The ground erupted. Elena had already changed direction. She'd moved before the shell hit because she'd calculated where it would land, based on the sound of the tube firing a kilometer away. She reached the tower's base. The structure was worse up close than it had looked from the trench. A skeleton of reinforced concrete and rusted steel, 3 stories of what had once been an observation post, now reduced to a framework of broken walls and exposed rebar and floors with sections missing large enough to fall through. The staircase was partially collapsed. Metal steps twisted at unnatural angles, some hanging by single bolts, others missing entirely. Elena didn't hesitate. She began climbing. The Barrett made it harder. 30 pounds of rifle slung across her back, shifting with every movement, catching on exposed rebar, threatening to overbalance her on the narrow, damaged steps. She compensated. Used her free hand to haul herself up through the gaps where stairs no longer existed, fingers finding purchase on concrete edges and steel reinforcement bars. Another artillery round struck the base of the tower. The entire structure shuddered, groaned. A section of wall on the second floor let go and crashed to the ground. The vibration traveled up through the structure, through Elena's hands and feet, through her spine. She kept climbing. The 3rd floor. What remained of it? Barely a platform. More gap than surface. Wind whipped through the open spaces where walls had been. Below her, the entire battlefield spread out like a relief map. She could see everything. Enemy formations to the north. Armored personnel carriers grinding up the slope. Infantry companies advancing behind the vehicles. To the west, the mobile artillery pieces. To the east and south, blocking forces sealing every escape route. And below, barely visible through smoke and dust, Alpha Platoon's defensive position. 27 soldiers waiting for the sound of her rifle. Waiting for the signal to run. Elena set up her firing position on the most stable section of floor she could find. Wedged the Barrett's bipod between chunks of broken concrete. She loaded a single round into the chamber, pulled the bolt forward, locked it. 1 shot ready. 7 more in her pocket, each one requiring a manual reload, slower than a magazine. But enough. 8 rounds. She would have to make every single one count. She acquired her first target, the command vehicle. A modified armored truck with communication antennas bristling from its roof. Inside that vehicle, someone was coordinating the entire assault. Remove that coordination and the assault would lose its brain. Range 912 meters. Wind 18 miles per hour, gusting from 3 o'clock. The viewport, the narrow observation slit on the driver's side, was not armored like the windshield. A .50 caliber round through that viewport would penetrate the cabin. She found the viewport through 12 power magnification. A dark rectangle no wider than a playing card at that distance. She exhaled halfway. Found the stillness between heartbeats. Squeezed. The Barrett roared. The sound echoed off the surrounding ridges, amplified by the tower's concrete walls, transformed into something that sounded less like a rifle and more like the voice of the mountain itself. 900 meters away, the command vehicle's viewport exploded inward. The vehicle swerved, stopped. The radio went silent, and every enemy weapon on the battlefield swung toward the observation tower. Now! Hastings' voice erupted across Alpha's position. Move, move, move! The platoon broke from cover. 27 soldiers sprinting south toward the gully. They moved in practiced fire teams, covering each other fast, but controlled. The wounded were carried. No one was left behind. At the tower, Elena was already cycling the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, thumbing a fresh round into the chamber. The manual reload took 3 seconds. 3 seconds she wouldn't have had if the enemy's return fire had been faster. She locked the bolt, acquired the artillery crews. First crew, 750 meters, 2 shots. The first round destroyed the fire control computer on the truck's bed. She reloaded. 3 seconds. The second found the senior crewman. The mortar system went dark. Second crew, 800 meters. They'd seen the first truck hit and were scrambling to relocate. Elena put a round through the engine block. The truck died mid-turn. Return fire began hammering the tower. It started with rifles, dozens of them. Then the vehicle-mounted weapons joined in. Heavy 12.7mm rounds punching through the tower's concrete walls. The observation tower began to disintegrate. Chunks of concrete broke away. Steel reinforcement bars screamed as they were struck. A section of floor on the second level gave way entirely. Elena shifted her position, found new stable ground, reloaded. 3 seconds. Kept shooting. Leaned out to issue orders. Elena waited, leaned out to issue orders. Elena waited, counted the rhythm, fired during the third lean-out. The officer dropped. The advance stalled. Reload. 3 seconds. 6 shots fired. 2 remaining. Below the tower, Alpha Platoon was making good progress. Nearly 300 meters covered. The enemy hadn't noticed they were leaving. Every eye, every weapon was focused on the tower. On the woman who refused to stop shooting. Hastings risked a glance back. The tower was a ruin now, barely standing, engulfed in dust and debris. He couldn't see Elena anymore, but the rifle kept firing. That distinctive report deep and steady cutting through the chaos like a heartbeat. She was still in the fight. At the top of what remained of the tower, Elena had abandoned her original position. A burst of heavy machine gun fire had torn through the concrete barrier she'd been using. The platform she'd been lying on collapsed entirely. She'd rolled, caught a steel beam, hauled herself onto a surviving section of floor barely wider than her body. Cramped, unstable. The entire structure swayed with every impact. But she could still see the battlefield, could still shoot. And there was one more threat. She found him through her scope at 1,400 meters. On the far southern ridge, a single figure moving with the deliberate, unhurried precision of a professional. Setting up a firing position behind a natural rock formation. Assembling a heavy-barreled rifle with practiced efficiency. A sniper. Someone held in reserve. Deployed only when the situation demanded the very best. He was good. Elena could see that from 1,400 meters away. The way he positioned his body. The way he used the terrain. The way his spotter communicated with hand signals rather than voice. Very good. Through her scope, Elena watched him settle behind his rifle. Watched him begin scanning the tower. Searching for her. In seconds, he would find her. She had to take the shot. Now, before his crosshairs settled on her. But 1,400 meters was at the absolute edge of impossible. The wind was gusting unpredictably. Sometimes 18 miles per hour. Sometimes 25. The difference would move the bullet's point of impact by more than 2 feet. The tower's movement added another variable. Her crosshairs drifted across the target in slow, nauseating circles as the structure rocked beneath her. And she had 2 rounds left. If she missed, she'd reveal her exact position to a trained sniper actively hunting her. His return shot would arrive in less than 4 seconds. She would not survive it. One chance. Elena studied the tower's movement. Back and forth. A 3-second cycle. At the midpoint, the moment when the tower changed direction, there was a brief instant of relative stability. A fraction of a second where the movement slowed to nearly 0. She would have to time her shot to that instant. The enemy sniper was almost ready. She could see him settling behind his rifle, beginning his own target acquisition. In seconds, their eyes would meet through glass and distance, and then it would be a simple question of who fired first. Elena found her breathing rhythm, slowed her heart rate. The world narrowed. Everything dissolved into white noise, leaving only the scope, the target, the swaying rhythm. Back, forth, midpoint. She fired. The bullet's flight time was nearly 4 seconds. 4 seconds where the enemy sniper continued his setup unaware. 4 seconds where wind could shift, where the bullet could drift, where the tower could sway. 1 second. The bullet crossed 350 meters. Wind pushed it right. Her compensation held. 2 seconds. 700 meters. Gravity pulling it downward. She'd aimed 23 feet above target to account for the arc. 3 seconds. 1,050 meters. The supersonic shockwave preceding the bullet would reach the target a fraction of a second before the round itself. 4 seconds. The enemy sniper's head snapped back. His rifle tumbled from the rock formation. His spotter flinched violently, staring at the space where his partner had been. Elena was already moving, scrambling across the unstable floor. Behind her, the corner she'd just occupied exploded under concentrated fire. Concrete fragments sprayed across the space she'd been lying in a half-second before. The tower groaned. A deep structural sound. The sound of a building dying. Support columns failing. The structure was coming down. Not in hours, not in minutes. Soon, Elena found a new position. Barely more than a crack between 2 surviving walls. Through a narrow window of visibility, she could see one critical thing. Alpha Platoon was almost clear. Nearly 500 meters from their original position. A few more minutes and they'd be beyond effective pursuit range. Then she saw it. 8 soldiers, breaking off from the main enemy force. Moving fast on the high ground above the gully, heading south to set up a blocking position that would trap the platoon. If they reached that position, Alpha was dead. Elena had 1 round left. 1. She found the squad leader, identified him by his position at the front by the radio handset pressed to his ear. She loaded her last round into the chamber, pulled the bolt forward, locked it. 1 shot. 1 chance to ensure Alpha's escape, and the tower was collapsing. She could feel the structure giving way beneath her. Support columns failing, floors pancaking. In seconds, the entire building would come down. Elena acquired the squad leader, calculated wind and distance with desperate speed. The floor began to shift. Concrete cracking, steel bending. She fired her last round just as the floor dropped from under her. She didn't see if the shot hit. The tower was falling, and she was falling with it. Metal screamed. Concrete shattered. The world became a chaotic tumble of debris and dust and gravity. Elena curled around her rifle, letting her body armor absorb what impacts it could. But there was too much falling too fast. She hit something hard. Her shoulder. Pain exploded through the joint. Then something harder. Her ribs. The impact compressed her chest, drove the air from her lungs. Her leg caught on a piece of rebar, twisting at an angle that sent white-hot agony lancing from knee to hip. Then she hit the ground. The world went gray, not black. The twilight zone between consciousness and its absence, where sounds became distant, and pain became theoretical, and time lost its meaning. She lay in the rubble, buried. Not completely. Enough to pin her in place. Her left arm was trapped beneath a concrete slab. Her rifle was somehow still in her right hand. Battered. Dust-covered. The scope was cracked. But the weapon was intact. Empty. Useless, but intact. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her scalp. Her ribs screamed with every breath. Broken. Multiple. Each inhalation felt like knives in her chest. Through the settling dust, she could hear voices. Close. Getting closer. Soldiers searching through the rubble, looking for her body, wanting to confirm the kill. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, quietly. Every inhalation felt like swallowing knives, but she controlled it. Made herself absolutely still. Footsteps approached. 2 soldiers, 10 feet away, then 5. One stepped on the rubble pile directly above her. Pebbles and concrete dust cascaded down onto her face, into her eyes. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, made herself part of the rubble. Another broken thing in a field of broken things. Nothing here, the soldier said. His English was accented, heavy, confident. Tower killed her. Let's check the... He never finished the sentence. Gunfire erupted from the south. Not the enemy's weapons. American weapons. The sharp crack of M4 carbines. The deep chatter of M240 machine guns. The distinctive thump of Mark 19 automatic grenade launchers. The cavalry. The relief force hit the enemy's southern flank like a hammer striking glass. A full company with armored support Bradleys and Humvees and dismounted infantry in a coordinated assault that caught the disorganized, leaderless enemy forces completely off guard. The 2 soldiers searching for Elena abandoned their hunt. They turned and ran. Elena listened to them go. Listened to the relief force engaging the enemy. The volume of American fire increasing as more units joined the fight. Then she allowed herself a breath, a real breath. Deep, full, agonizing. Her broken ribs protested with sharp stabbing pain. But she was alive. Alpha Platoon had made it. The relief force had arrived. The mission was complete. She let her head fall back against the rubble. Exhaustion hit like a physical force. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the entire battle drained away all at once. What remained was pain and weariness and something else. Something that felt impossibly like peace. Graves, where are you? Hastings' voice. He'd come back. Left the safety of the retreating platoon and come back to find her. Here, Elena called out weakly. Under the tower. Footsteps. Running. Then hands. Soldiers' hands rough and desperate, moving debris. More hands joining. Vance. Caldwell. Priestley. They'd all come back. Hastings' face appeared above her, streaked with dirt and dried blood. Eyes red-rimmed, but alive. You magnificent idiot, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. You absolute magnificent idiot. Did everyone make it? Elena asked. 27 out of 28. Hastings' voice went quiet. We lost Weber. His wounds were too severe. He died during the withdrawal. Elena closed her eyes. Kyle Weber. Young, quiet. She hadn't known him, but she'd fought for him, had climbed a tower and held death ground and fired every last round she possessed for him and 27 others. 27 survived. One didn't. The mathematics was cold. The weight was not. Everyone else, Hastings continued shaking his head. Everyone else is alive because of you. Medics arrived. Broken ribs confirmed. 3, possibly 4. Fractured left forearm. Concussion moderate to severe. Severe contusions. Lacerations on her face and hands. Painful, serious, but not fatal. She'd live. Weeks in a hospital. Months of rehabilitation. But she'd live. As the medics prepared to move her, Elena looked back at the ruins of the observation tower. A heap of broken concrete and twisted steel that no longer resembled a building. Diane would be proud, she murmured. What? Hastings asked, walking beside the stretcher. Nothing. Elena managed a small smile. Just finishing something I started 3 years ago. 3 weeks later. Forward Operating Base Campbell. Elena sat in a hospital bed, her arm in a cast, her ribs tightly wrapped. The concussion symptoms had mostly faded. The physical wounds were healing following the body's ancient reliable process of knitting bone and closing skin and rebuilding what had been broken. The other wounds, she was working on those. The door opened. Hastings entered. He wore a fresh uniform with new insignia on his collar. They'd promoted him for the action at Ember Ridge. He carried a folder under his arm. You look better, he said. I feel like the tower fell on me, Elena replied. Which it did. But yes, better than 3 weeks ago. Hastings sat in the chair beside her bed. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two people who had been through something that most human beings would never experience. Command wants to see you, Hastings said finally. They've read the reports, seen the battlefield assessment. They know what you did. I did my job. You saved 27 lives while holding off a reinforced enemy company alone from a collapsing building. That's beyond the job description. He opened the folder. They want you back in Shadowline. Full reactivation. Your pick of assignments. Elena had been expecting this. And if I refuse, then they respect your decision. But they wanted me to deliver the offer personally. Hastings paused. What are you going to do? Elena looked down at her hands. The same hands that had fired every round she carried that day. Each one a decision made in the space between heartbeats. Each one a weight she would carry for the rest of her life. Diane told me once that every bullet changes the world, she said quietly. I spent 3 years trying to forget that. Trying to be someone who didn't carry that weight. She looked up. Her eyes were clear. Steady. No longer haunted. Not healed, maybe not ever, but no longer running. But at Ember Ridge, I remembered something else she said. She said the weight is proof we're human. Proof we care. The day it stops feeling heavy is the day we've lost something essential. Elena met Hastings' eyes. So I'm going to carry it. But I'm going to choose what I carry it for. Tell Command I'll come back. But on my terms. No more black operations. No more missions that officially never happened. If I'm going to do this, I want to know who I'm protecting and why. Hastings smiled. The kind of smile that said he'd known this was coming. They anticipated you might say that. There's a new program, training the next generation of precision marksmen, teaching them not just how to shoot, but how to carry the weight, how to make the hard decisions and live with them afterward. He paused. They want you to lead it. Elena considered this. Teaching. Passing on Diane's lessons. Making sure the next generation understood not just the mathematics of long-range precision fire, but the thing that mattered more than all of it. The weight, the responsibility, the understanding that every bullet changed the world. I accept, she said. Good. Hastings stood. And one more thing. The soldiers from Alpha. They've been asking about you. Non-stop. Every day. They want to visit. All of them. Every single one. I'm not a hero. You held death ground against impossible odds to save people you barely knew. You became exactly the kind of legend Diane was. Hastings' expression softened. Whether you like it or not, you matter to them. To me. To everyone who'll hear this story. Diane would tell me I'm being an idiot again, Elena said. But she was smiling now. A real smile. Small but genuine. Probably. But she'd also tell you to accept it and move forward. He turned to leave. Paused at the door. Hey, Graves. Yeah, that day. At the Ridge. When you were in the tower, you could have followed us, could have withdrawn with the platoon when you had the chance. Why did you stay? Elena thought about how to answer. About 3-second delays and 3-year regrets. About bullets that changed the world and weights that proved you were human. About a woman named Diane who had taught her that sometimes the hardest choices are the most necessary ones. About a tower that no longer stood, and a rifle that had finally gone quiet, and a version of herself that she tried to bury but could never quite kill. Because, she said finally, I wasn't 3 seconds too slow anymore. I was exactly on time. She paused, and that mattered. Hastings held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once. The kind of nod that carried more weight than a salute, more meaning than a medal. Welcome back, Reaper. After he left, Elena sat alone in the quiet hospital room. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Fort Campbell, painting the sky in shades of red and gold and deep burning amber. The kind of sunset that made the world look like it was on fire. The kind that made you stop whatever you were doing and just watch. She watched. Tomorrow, she'd begin physical therapy. Next month, she'd start her new assignment. Next year, she'd train men and women who might one day face their own Ember Ridge, their own impossible choices, their own 3-second windows where everything that mattered hung in the balance. But today, she just sat and watched the sunset. And for the first time in 3 years, the weight she carried didn't feel quite so crushing. It didn't feel lighter. It would never feel lighter. Diane's death, the 3 seconds, the lives she'd taken on that frozen Montana ridgeline, those things had weight, and they would always have weight. But the weight had changed shape. It was no longer the formless, suffocating mass that had pressed her into logistics desks and sleepless nights, and a silence so deep she'd almost forgotten the sound of her own voice. Now it felt like something she could hold. Something she could carry forward. Something with purpose. 6 months later. Sniper Training Facility. Fort Harrison, Montana. Instructor Graves stood before a class of 23 students. Some were experienced soldiers looking to specialize. Others were fresh from infantry training, eager and nervous and completely unprepared for what she was about to teach them. They sat in neat rows, notebooks open, pens, ready, eyes fixed on the small, quiet woman at the front of the room, who looked like she belonged behind a desk instead of behind a rifle. They didn't know yet. They would learn. Precision marksmanship isn't about guns, she began. Her voice was calm, steady, but warmer now, carrying something it hadn't carried before. It's not about bullets or ballistics or how steady your hands are. It's about decisions. Split-second choices that you'll carry for years, maybe forever. She paused. Let the silence do its work. Every shot you take changes the world in ways you can't always see. Sometimes it saves lives. Sometimes it costs them. You'll never know which until long after the bullet has left the barrel. All you can do is trust that you're doing more good than harm. One student raised her hand. Young woman, early 20s, dark hair pulled back tight. Something in her eyes that reminded Elena of herself at that age. How do you carry that weight, ma'am? How do you keep going when every shot matters that much? Elena thought of Diane, of Ember Ridge, of a tower that collapsed and a woman who didn't, of a sunset watched through a hospital window and a promise made to a ghost. You carry it, she said simply, by remembering why it's heavy. The day it stops weighing on you is the day you need to put down the rifle and walk away. She looked across the room. At 23 faces, 23 futures. But as long as you feel it, as long as it matters, she smiled. Small. Real. The smile of someone who had found her way back from a very dark place and discovered that the light on the other side was worth the journey. Then you know you're still human, still capable of doing good, still worth the trust people place in you. She picked up the Barrett from the table beside her. The same rifle. Repaired. Restored. The cracked scope replaced. The bent bipod straightened. The scratches and dents from the tower's collapse still visible on the stock because she'd asked the armorer to leave them. They were part of the story now. Part of the weight. The initials RG still etched into the polymer. Reaper Graves, a name she no longer ran from. Now, she said, let us talk about wind reading, because understanding wind is the difference between a perfect shot and 3 seconds too slow. The students leaned forward, ready to learn. And somewhere in the echo of words spoken by a woman who would never be forgotten in the memory of a tower that no longer stood in the space between one heartbeat and the next, where the world held its breath and waited for the shot, Diane Rawlings smiled. Because her student had finally learned the most important lesson. Not how to shoot, but why it mattered. And that was everything.